Hello members, welcome to your Easy Peony and Watercolor. Thanks for being here. I so appreciate your support and I can't wait to share this video with you. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I like to try to keep things affordable and accessible for everybody. This entire setup is under $50. I'm including all of the product links in the description box down below, so make sure you check those out. Today, I'm only using 5 colors. I like using tubes because I can control the level of pigmentation, and I'm using a nice little porcelain watercolor tray. A set of 5 brushes is all you'll need. In fact, we'll probably only use a few of those. A kneadable eraser, a pencil, and of course some water. I'm using a 9x12 block, and with watercolor, I think the most important thing is to have the right paper. I'm using 140-pound cold pressed paper, but the key here is that it's 100% rag or 100% cotton, so it is an artist quality paper. That said, any 140-pound paper will do. I do like the cold press surface because it has just a nice natural kind of fibrous texture to it, which really changes the way the watercolor flows over the surface. So I'm going to be showing you this from the very first step through sketching right to the finished product. If you can do one petal, you can do the whole thing. It's just a matter of being patient and understanding the right techniques. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. It makes a really big difference to me and my work, and it allows me to continue posting free content just like this. So we're going to start with a simple sketch. So I'll start with the basic geometry of this flower, and you can find the link to a downloadable version of this that you can print out if you're not comfortable freehand sketching this, but I'm going to go ahead and sketch this from scratch. So what I'm noticing here is that the peony is set at a slight angle, and we're going to start with the center ball shape. Don't worry about the intensity of the pencil at this point. We can always lighten things up and change the shape afterwards. So I'm focusing on that center ball shape. And then I'm going to do an outside disc that will represent the bigger petals that are kind of flopped open. And some of these petals will go outside of the shape. Some of them will be inside of the shape. At this point, I'm not too concerned. I just want to get the proportions right and make sure that nothing's cut off. So it kind of looks like a bit of a flying saucer here. Then what I'm going to do is locate the heart of our flower. So rather than it being right in the middle of this circle, it's actually in the middle of the flower, but the perspective is changing the relationship between this edge and the center and this edge and the center. So we are going to put it about here. It's not going to be visible, but it's important to know where it is for 2 purposes. One, when we're putting this stem on, we want to make sure the stem is pointing towards the center. But 2, there's going to be a flow where all of the petals will come out from that shape. Now with peonies, I actually like freehand sketching this to make the shapes a little bit more organic. But if you want to place them in overlapping discs like that, you can. I'm just going to wing it. It's whatever your comfort level is. But here we go. I'm going to get a little bit closer for you. So I'm going to start by just making sure that every petal has some sort of ruffled edge to it, and that ultimately it kind of curves and flows towards the center of the flower. Some of them are slightly more open, and then we have some overlapped petals on the inside. I'm just using a kind of soft, scalloped, slightly jagged edge. But having that main structure established right from the beginning is so helpful. It maintains the proportions of the petals and also keeps you on target in terms of scale. There aren't that many petals to this peony. Peonies can get out of control with the number of petals that they have. So I picked a fairly simple one for you. So I'm just making sure that there's this beautiful radiating feeling to all of the petals that point towards that heart. Remember, everything kind of should spin out from that center point. And that really maintains the structure of the flower. take away anything that is not serving me right now. So take away all my old guidelines, and I'm just using my kneadable eraser. I don't know any spring flower lovers that don't love a peony. Their beautiful, fleeting existence is something that I look forward to every year in my garden, and they just don't stick around long enough. There's always a rainstorm that comes and knocks them down after. I think painting them is probably the best version of the peony because it will last a lot longer. So you can do 1 or 2 leaf structures just kind of popping out from the main stem here. It's up to you. Notice that they have an elongated formation. Generally they come in 3 pieces. You can just do whatever feels good to you design-wise. So today's lesson, I'm going to be showing you how to work wet into wet and get those beautiful fluid blended areas from petal to petal. As always, we start light to dark and big to small. So I'm getting my palette ready. What's in here are my concentrated paints, and I will be creating separate pools over here. We'll be working with the gamboge, their light kind of leaf colored green, an ultramarine blue, their magenta, and then their scarlet red. So just 5 colors. We're going to be doing some mixing in the palette, some mixing right on the paper. For the most part, the mixing is going to happen on the paper to really get a more dynamic range of color. So let's start with just demonstrating 1 single petal to show you how this works. If you can do 1 petal, you can do an entire flower. I think that is a really important lesson. People often feel overwhelmed, especially with these multi-layered flowers that have complex petal systems. So I've just lightly drawn a vague petal shape here just to show you how quickly and easily we can do 1 petal. So we always want to prepare our paints before our paper. So what I want to do is just make sure I've got some nice diluted color out in my palette, ready to go. So I'm grabbing a bit of the magenta, some of the scarlet color. What's in my main tray is far too concentrated for these beginning layers and washes. So we have to take the pigment out and then deposit it into the mixing space. And then I add water afterwards. So I'm going to make violet by using some of this magenta color. It's kind of like a fuchsia color. Take a bit of this ultramarine, add that. That's a little bit too bluey, so I'm just going to add more pink. Okay, that works. And then a little bit of our yellow. Let's make 2 pools of that gamboge color, which is kind of like a cadmium yellow medium. I'm going to make 2 pools because I'm going to be adding a little bit of green and some red to one. So watch this pool here. I'll just add a bit more water to this one. With this pool, I'm going to add the green, which is the light green, but that looks a little bit phony, a little bit fake looking. So I'm going to just add a little bit of this hot red, the scarlet, to dull the green down and make it a bit more of an olive color. So that's more what we're after. Finally, I'm going to take that green, just pick the pigment up, deposit it into the mixing space, and add a little bit of blue so that we get a deeper, duller blue green. And I like using the ultramarine because of the warmth to the ultramarine. It gives me kind of a duller gray blue-green as opposed to a phthalo blue or cerulean or even a Prussian. So again, just getting to know your colors a little bit will really help to optimize your color mixing. It's always a good idea to have a little bit of tissue on hand, some paper towel, a test strip, and maybe 2 jars of water. One for cleaning your brush, one for drawing clean solution. So in our little sketch here, I'm going to pre-wet, and this will allow the paint to float on top of the surface. So I'm pre-wetting this shape. I'm using my largest number 10 round brush. And then I'm going to start with just a light version of that watery scarlet color. So notice that the color is just floating on the surface. It's very easy to spread because I've pre-wet the surface. I rinse my brush, blot my brush off on the paper towel. I'll pick up a little bit of the magenta color and I'll just show you what happens. The color's really flowing and spreading so easily. And then if I wanted to, I could pick up a more concentrated version of that. So I can go into the main well, and you can see just by touching the paint to the surface, it really spreads. That's our wet into wet technique. Very, very easy. The next thing you should know is if you're new to watercolor, if you want, you can take a damp brush, so a brush that is clean and not totally dry, but just a little bit damp, so barely any water on it. If things get out of control for you, there's a really easy solution. Rather than blotting with tissue, which would dry up the patch, you can actually just vacuum up a little bit of that excess. Now, when the brush becomes saturated, you can just wipe it on some tissue or blot it on your rag or paper towel. So I'll show you that again. If ever you want to lighten something up, but maintain that soft edge without blotting hard with tissue, you just soak it up and then wipe it away. So that's our first phase of the peony flower. We're just going to be doing a lot of wet into wet washes, and then we'll move on to glazing. Let's move on to the real flower now. Okay, so to start, we're doing really light translucent washes that require a blurry result. So I'm pre-wetting. And I'm using my large flat brush. You can use a round brush if you want. So I'm wetting every single petal really, really well. The other thing about cotton paper or 100% rag paper is it holds the water a little bit longer. So that's a really big advantage as well. So you notice that the flower is really quite glossy. That's important because I want all of the color to flow effortlessly and flawlessly over the surface. So I'm starting with the warmer red. So I'm scooping it up from my diluted solution here. I'm depositing in the strongest areas first. And with these first few strokes, we're just applying a little bit of a blush of color. So I'm not too worried about accuracy or precision right now. Don't worry about the yellow stamens in the center. I'm going to show you a little trick with that a bit later. Just move this down a bit for you. So notice I'm kind of just blobbing this in, and now I will take my brush and pull it outward using those radiating brush strokes. I want all of the petals to have a little bit of a tinted appearance, so they should have kind of a nice shell pink color. Take care to just come right up to the edges. And before that dries, what I'm going to do is poke my brush into my main well here. And you're welcome to create a very concentrated pool of color, but I'm just testing it here. What I'm going to do is take that same brush, this is my number 10 round, and I'm going to apply the very concentrated color right at the bottom, the underside of each of those kind of big center petals. And now I'm just going to wipe my brush off. I can see it is bursting a little bit. So I'm going to, using those radiating strokes, just pull that up and around. Your strokes should always follow the same form as the flower. That will emulate the veins, and it gives it that kind of growing from the center out appearance. So there's a bit more of that concentrated color here. And I'm going to come around the center. We're going to be building towards much more concentrated color, so don't worry about getting the absolute finished depth of color at this point. It's too soon. Right now, we're just putting sort of vague light shapes and just using that one warm red color, not the pink right now. It's much easier to cool things down than it is to warm them up, so just using a bit of a circular stroke here for some blending. Okay, so let me bring this in for a closer look. You can see that it's still quite wet. Now what I want to do is apply the yellow while it's still a bit damp. And I'm going to put that right into the stamens. I'm actually going to use the yellow from the main palette. It's still pretty liquidy. The key here is to just drop it in and then allow that yellow to kind of burst. Let me show you here. Notice that the paint is watery enough that it's actually kind of opening up a space for itself, pushing the red color aside and creating a beautiful glow. That's really important because that allows the yellow to kind of drill its way down to the white of the paper. So it's pushing the red aside, and it's all about timing. That takes a little bit of practice and watching your paper to see when it's glossy versus when it's damp. So moving on to the stems and the leaves, it's going to be a similar family of color for both. I'm going to pre-wet this stem here. And I might as well just start with that. Let's start with a little bit of yellow, dropping that in. And again, it just runs very effortlessly. I'm not too concerned about the yellow bleeding up into the wet petals here, but of course, if you are, you can just dry that initial layer so that it's secure and safe. And the next thing I'm going to do is take that mossy green. Now feel free to move down to a smaller brush. I'm just using my larger brush here because I have a little bit more practice and lots of control. So before that yellow dries, I just want to get a little bit of that green, and you can apply it just to the edge if you want to. Notice that the point of my brush is pointing to the outer edge. That gives me a much cleaner line. So I can start with that. Now we don't even have to wait for that to dry. If you're ready, you can actually go right back into that hot red. So this warm red, rinse your brush, of course. This brush comes to such a good point, I don't even need to go down into my detail brush. So we know that red and green kind of make a brownish color. So instead of using brown, I'm using this hot red and a bit of color theory to kind of create a peachy brown effect here on the stem. Just going to charge up the green a little bit more, which means boosting the color. And there we are. That's plenty for now. We can always create more of a shadow under here afterwards. If this has happened to you and you can see that your green paint is flowing into the flower and that's not desirable, just take a little bit of tissue and you can just blot that out. It's not a problem. All right, so we can actually move on to the first layer of leaves while we're waiting for that bloom to dry. And if your brush fits perfectly into this shape, you can actually just apply the paint right away. But if you're a beginner, it's often a little easier to pre-wet your shape first. Again, just use the natural shape and the natural taper of the brush and a variety of pressure. So from a light pressure to a harder pressure, changing the shape of the tip. Starting with the yellow again. Just drop that right in, and it's flowing very easily because the paper surface is quite wet. And before that dries, I can just take that mossy green and you can just sort of touch it to the surface. And we're just going to flow that down to connect the shapes. Maybe this one I can flow upward. Again, if you want it to be a little bit more natural, you can take some of that red and drop that in. I'm actually going to do that in addition to dragging it down into this little stem just to connect with the main stem. So that's just our first layer. I'm going to do the same with the brightest light green leaf on this last piece here. I'll show you what it looks like just painting it on dry. I really loaded my brush and apply the yellow direct. It means that the color will be a little bit more concentrated, but that's fine. Then I'll go into the mossy green. I'll just drop it right here and right here. Just coax that down and flow them together. Always making sure that the point of the brush is pointing outside your shape for a crisper edge. Again, if you want it to be a bit more earthy, you can drop some of that warm red. You can also use the magenta if you want to play with your values and your hues a little bit more. Okay, that's it. That's our first layer. We'll come back to these ones. They're a slightly different color story and they need a little bit more depth. And because, as you can see, my flower is still quite wet, I don't want to do these leaves just yet. So if you're concerned about warping or buckling, you can just use your hairdryer. I have a whole video on how to do this. Even with large sheets of paper, this helps to keep your paper flat. I'm just going to go ahead and do this off camera so that you don't have to listen to this right now. All right, friends, so this is completely dry and I can feel that it's not cool to the touch. So that means that I've eliminated all of the moisture, which means it's safe to move on to the next glazing phase. And this is where we start separating the petals and really working on the range of values. Now we can break it down into smaller puzzle pieces. So let's go ahead and look at one or two petals. Let's look at this one in the front here. So what I'm seeing is that we've got a very dark concentrated underside, and then we've got a few light veins that kind of flow upward. And of course they should radiate like that coming from this point here. So this time I am still going to pre-wet the surface, but I'm not going to wet it as much as we did the very first time because that will be a little too fluid. So for me, I just want a little bit of dampness. So it's wet, but it's not got that uber glossy kind of effect that we had with that initial wash. So you're welcome to work with a smaller brush. I'm using my number 6 here. So I'm just going to go into my concentrated red this time. I wet my brush and I'm picking up just a bit of that paint. Of course, I tested on my test strip to see how it feels. And I'm going to deposit the color once again where it is most concentrated. This time I'm going to just using the tip. Let's get a different viewpoint here. Just using the tip of the brush, I want to kind of pull this paint upward. Now you can see because it's just got a damp surface, the lines are still visible, but there's a softness to them, which is quite different from if they had been applied to a totally dry surface. Now, if it looks too strong like this, you can just take a little bit of water on your brush, and I'm going to kind of zigzag the water through to soften and then create some median lines. So some lines that are just kind of cutting back into that red, really just focusing on a rounded, cupped kind of feel to this particular petal. And notice that I'm not filling up this upper section. I want to kind of keep it clear. I also noticed that the angle here is a little bit off, so I'm just going to correct that right now. Just taking water and brushing that back through to give it a more fanned out look. If I'm happy with that, which I think it's quite nice the way it is, I can just finally add a little bit more color again at the bottom and then just do a miniature fanned out version of that, which will kind of give me a little bit more volume. Now, it wouldn't be wise to do the neighboring petal because they're touching each other. This color is going to flow into that color. But you can kind of jump around and use the same technique elsewhere with petals that are not connected. So for instance, I can move to this petal up here and break it apart from the one below. So let's look at that. Once again, I'm just going to pre-wet very subtly the petal that I'm going to be painting. So just wetting with a little bit of water and taking a little bit of that concentrated red again. This time, this guy is got a little bit of pigment around the edge and then a bit more color. So here's where the separation between these two petals occurs. I'm just going to almost outline this petal shape and then using a little bit of water, just kind of stretch these out and flow these out. Once again, just pulling some of the veins outward, radiating and pivoting in a soft way. I really like the hard edge that it created there, and that's the technique that we're going to be using throughout any areas. We're kind of painting petals that have a bit of shadow, so I'm going to separate these ones as well. So pre-wet the petal that I'm going to paint, apply a little bit of the concentrated scarlet red, start with somewhat of an outline. Sometimes it will flow up on its own, but other times you need to kind of coax it. So now I'm just taking a little bit of damp strokes and then just pushing it up. So I just keep moving around the flower, trying to just work with areas that are not touching each other. There's another piece here. This one is very pretty because it actually has a little bit of red and pink. Any pieces that are very, very small, you can just use your diluted paint and paint direct on the surface. If you're not comfortable, you might want to test it first. I'm using the warm scarlet red color. So you can see that diluted color. I'm just going to emphasize the back side of this. So I've kept that little patch dry, which gives me that curl in the petal. So I'm using the scarlet color here, and now what I'm going to do is drop in some of that magenta kind of color. That gives a bit more dimension. I'm going to drop it here where the shadow is darkest. All right, so this petal is dry. That means I can move on to that one. This is large, so I'm going to pre-wet. So basically it comes down to any of your largest petals, not a bad idea to pre-wet first. Very small petals, however, you can approach it with just a wet on dry. So I'm going to start with the more concentrated red, so going into the mothership here. Apply it where it's most concentrated, as always, and then just flow and radiate those veins out, fanning towards the outer edges. Now we do have a dark edge here. I can't do that right now because this is wet. So I actually have to wait for this to dry, and then I'll be able to fill in this dark edge. So for now, we just do the light stuff. I do see a little bit of that magenta again, a slightly cooler color right here. Let's drop that in before it dries up. I'm using the diluted magenta. There we go. Just taking care to keep my edges nice and clean. So notice that the color is more concentrated in the heart of the flower, and then it flows out and becomes more diluted towards the edges. There is a nice hard edge here that I like to get, so I'm just putting a bit more pigment on that edge. I'll move on to this petal. Same thing, it's large. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-wet this time, just the inside, just like we did here, the inside of the petal, taking care not to pre-wet the outer furled edges. So water, you're starting to see a pattern here, hopefully. Water, and this time I'm going to use the more diluted warm red simply because it's a lighter version. Water, warm red, and then cool red. which in our case is the magenta here. I like to make those edges a bit more concentrated, so I'm actually going to take that magenta and just outline the edge a tiny bit, but because it's still wet, it won't look too stiff or rigid, giving it a bit more of a natural shape. Okay, once again, the outside edges were dry, so try to maintain their integrity and keep them dry. So I can't do this petal because these two are wet. So once again, I'll just jump over to an area that hasn't been painted yet. So what I'm seeing for this petal is we actually have a hard edged shadow right here. So that means I won't pre-wet the shape. I'm just going to jump right in with my warm but diluted red. Working on dry, I'm going to paint this cast shadow. So that will give me nice hard edges, like that. I'm going to drop the magenta in. And I think for this one, I'm going to actually take a little bit of the violet as well, which will really read as a nice cast shadow. I'm going back to the center of the flower now where it's really concentrated. I'm working on dry. I'm taking the scarlet color and I'm just going to do a bit of negative space painting. So that means cutting around some of the inside edges, and this will really help to make the yellow pop. Because I'm working on dry, I'm able to create very clean edges and there's no blurring. So I'm going to visit this petal now while everything else kind of dries up. I'm going to pre-wet the inside cupped shape. I think for this one, I'd actually like to start with the magenta color. It's the diluted solution. Drop that in, really let it flow. If you're happy with that color, you can leave it, but I think I'm actually going to drop some of the violet in as well. Create that nice contrasting shadow. So all of the petals are dry now. I'm going to safely pre-wet this guy here. Just with a little bit of water. And scoop around the edge. I'm going to go into my concentrated warm red. Remember that if you are looking for more, if you're looking for longer, more intense tutorials with a more realistic vibe, I've got a whole bunch of them on my website. The links are in the description box below as well. And that will really up your game. You can watch them over and over. They come with color charts, some free color theory, and a sketch. And they usually span an hour to 2 hours. They're yours to keep with unlimited views as well. So keep an eye out for those. I'm going to jump back over to this petal here. I'm going to paint its furled edge, and I'm going to do that on dry with the diluted red. Notice that I'm changing the pressure of my brush too. When I want a thin line, I press very lightly. When I want a thick line, I can press a little bit harder. to show you a new technique, and this is our bleeding out technique. So I'm working on dry. I just want to make this a little bit more concentrated, but if I were to leave it like that, I would get a hard edge. So I'm taking a little bit of water on my brush, and then I'm just going to slowly connect it to that shape and then just brush it upward. This gives me a chance to put on a few little veins as well. Remember, you want to follow the contour, the natural shape, so make sure it's cupping and moving outward. Maybe I'll put a bit of violet in here. And I'm just going to pull that up very lightly, making sure, again, that you're curving upward and out. So I'm going to go back into this section with my diluted violet mixture, test it here. Working on dry, I'm going to do the same thing. Put my color. I'll do a few veins. That looks way too harsh, so I'm going to take a bit of water and slowly pull them out, softening the edges, but maintaining the sharpness. We don't want it getting too stripy, so that's why everything has a little bit of softness to it. For this one, it's the same, slightly different color. I'm going to use the hot red. So it starts off kind of harsh, rinse my brush, bring back a little bit of dampness, pull those stripes out. All of these last three have been done on completely dry paper. Keep that in mind. I need to do the inside of this petal. I'll go back to that old method where we wet the surface first. But you can see I'm just kind of making use of my time as I'm waiting for certain shapes to dry up. I'm a little bit impatient and I want to make the most of this video for you guys. So I'm moving along at a quick pace, but you can, of course, come back to this anytime. Here's the magenta. You can see what a difference it makes on the wet petal. It just flows beautifully. I'm going to grab a little bit of the violet to add a bit more depth on the inside. Just let that flow outward. So I'm going to continue here working in the same way. Sometimes on dry where I want more concentrated spaces, sometimes re-wetting when I want softness. Some of the final touches, I'm just working on dry and using that bleeding out technique. It really gives me a lot more control over the segments and finer spaces. So for instance, I'm just going to paint the negative space in behind this one petal. I'm kind of just creating a line here. And then I want to give the impression that there's a little bit more complexity to the inside of this flower. So I'm doing a few extra little lines like that. And then I'm just going to take a bit of water and soften this. So I kind of blur it up a little bit after, and then I'm just going to drag this tail out. These are some of the refining moves that will make your petals a little bit more three-dimensional. I feel like I'd like to see another petal out here. I think I'm missing it. It's not too late, I'm gonna get it in. So if I want to keep this loose and impressionistic and more like an illustration, I probably should stop there. There's just one little separation right here, this upper segment. I'll add a little bit more texture and definition. There is one last sweet shadow right in here that I want to get. There's two things happening. One, there's that concentrated warm red on the back side of this petal here. So I'm going to try to capture that. Okay. There's a nice spot of red right here as well. Notice that I'm working on dry because these are really small spaces. So I have to let that dry, and then I'm going to fill this section in with a little bit more of that violet. So I'm going to start on dry with the magenta, just kind of getting a feel for my shadow. Notice that my petals aren't exactly like the sketch. You can be more loyal to yours if you want to. Be sure to grab the downloadable sketch from my website. Again, the link is in the bottom underneath this video in the description box. Okay, so I'll stop there. In the meantime, we can go back to the foliage. So this has long since dried. If you have masking fluid, you could actually mask out the lighter veins here, but I'm going to just put some of them on dark and maybe leave some of them behind as well. First thing I'm going to do though is just put a first coat on these two. I'm going to take a shortcut and just fill that up on dry with my mossy green mixture. If you want to pre-wet, you certainly can. It's to your comfort. I'm going to go into that blue-green. Just float that in. And spread it around. If you'd like to see a little bit more blue in your leaves, you can go right into your concentrated blue and you can actually rim the edges with it or drop it right in to mix inside the leaf. It's totally up to you. I'll just show you what it looks like there. For a little bit more harmony, I'm going to take that same blue-green and just put a tiny bit of it here. And this is where I'll show you how we can work on dry and just leave. All right, so now that these have dried, I can go back and add a little extra touch. What I'm going to do is pre-wet this leaf so that the darker color flows effortlessly over top. So I'm going back to my dark bluey green mixture. And I've got on standby, you can use a skewer or the end of a sharp brush, but I've got my scratch board tool here. And watch what I will do with this. So I showed you how to do the light veins without masking fluid. And now if you want to do darker veins, you just apply some paint of any color. I'm using that dark bluey green. And I'll just come in a little bit closer. While that is wet, you can take your sharp tool and you actually just very lightly drag it across the surface. And what this does is actually wreck the surface of your paper a little bit, but it allows the paint to stain into those scratch marks. So it's a quick way of obtaining a sharp line. Of course, it goes darker rather than lighter, so it just depends on what you're looking for. So I'll show you that technique again here. So you do have to apply some paint. It won't work with just water. And I'm going to actually drag this down into the main stem here. And I want to show you how pretty it looks when we add the magenta color to that green. It really gives us that peony look. So I always feel like there's a little bit of the flower color that bleeds into the stems and the leaves. It's those extra little details that really make a painting come to life. So here I am with my scratchboard tool. And you do not need much pressure here. You want to make sure you get it right though, because there's not really any way to correct that afterwards. So I do like the look of that. I'm going to actually add a little bit of contrast to some of the veins that I had on that first leaf that were lighter. Just going to get rid of this little nub here. Yeah, so now I've got a variety. Some veins are light, some veins are dark. I'm going to use the same technique on the left-hand side, just wetting, applying a little bit of a darker paint, and then using the scratching tool. Of course, if you want to maintain your highlights, you wouldn't pre-wet, you just paint your greens on dry and leave gaps for lighter veins. Don't forget that extra little bit of the pink, which adds a bit more realism to your leaves. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I really appreciate you being here. This is the final product and I hope it was easy to follow. Let me know in the comments, and I'm so happy that you're here, that you joined the membership. You deserve all the good, all the wonderful things that come from growing your creative journey, and I'm sure happy that you're sharing it with me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Until the next time.